works. This is one that we're going to do next week. This one is not necessary. For now, we're just going to create a very simple snow particle system. So I just drag it in my top viewport and I move it a little bit up. When I move the time bar, you see that there is particles falling down. Now, if I want particles to interact with an object, so let's say I have a piece of roof of a house, something, so I can create like a roof over here, like that. I'm going to make it a little bit thinner, so something like that, and I want to have a width segment. Convert to editable poly. This is just to real quickly get a roof shape. So this was just a cube that I turned into a roof, and you see that my particles are falling on top of it. So I'm just going to place it roughly so over here. So at the moment, particles and 3D objects, they don't see each other. They are just moving through each other. So one of the first things that I always start with is I go to my space warps and then I start thinking about the forces. In this case, the only force that I want to create is gravity. So I make a gravity force. And I directly go take a look at one menu below at deflectors. And in this case, I want to use a U deflector. And the U deflector, I can load in my box, the roof, basically. I go to my modify panel. This is something that I also saw before, that sometimes people are still in this menu. They created a deflector over here, but they are still in this create menu. And then they start making changes to this thing, but it won't be applied because all the changes you made over here is about the next one you're going to create. So when you create a deflector or a gravity or particle system, always go to your modify panel afterwards. Basically, I created a U deflector. So I did this, create a U deflector, and then I go to my modify panel. In the modify panel, I see the settings of this U deflector. In this case, the first setting is that I want to load in an item. So I say pick an object and pick this box. Still nothing happens because it is not bound. They are not bound to each other. And now, if I want to bind them, I click on this bind to space warp. And then I click and I hold down my mouse button on top of this particle system. So click and hold so that you get this dotted line. And now it says, okay, to which thing do you want to bind it? So I want to bind it to this deflector. And then I let it go. And now you see particles are basically bouncing off. The thing is that if I want to do something with that bounce, I go back to my deflector, and now I can play with the bounciness. I can say more or less bounce. So in this case, I make the bounce completely 0. So particles will just fall and will just slide off the roof. I can make the friction 100%, then it becomes more like snow. Particles will just stay at that spot and they won't slide off anymore. I'm just going to lower the friction a little bit so they will fly off a little bit, but not so fast. And then I also have to bind it to gravity. So I take my particle system again and I bind it to gravity.
And then the other one is also bounded still, or binding.
Yeah, here, if I now select my particle system, I select my particle system and I take a look at my modify panel. And then I see gravity binding and U deflector binding. So I see all the names. Handy is that if you name your deflectors and forces, if you give them a name, gravity speaks for itself, but maybe you have two different winds. Maybe you say, low wind on the floor and high wind in the trees, for example, when you have different winds going on. Especially when you work with multiple deflectors, you can call this thing, for example, U deflector, roof, house, for example. Naming your deflectors will make it very easy. Oh, I thought it would also show up over here. But yeah, you can always because when you have a lot of those same icons going on, then it's hard to see, like, hey, which one controls what. So I always rename my deflector to what object I loaded in. Now, if I, let's say if I want to create like a fountain, which is spraying. So if I start with a new scene, or I just reset everything, don't save. Yeah. So I'm gonna make a very crappy fountain. So what I do is, this is just visually. Visually, I just want to have some sort of pond area, like 20, 5. So I say I want this thing convert to an editable poly. I select this big polygon. I give it a inset, something like that, and then I make an extrude and make it go down, something like that. If I want, I can even take this same shape and make a duplicate out of it. So I make an extra. The original polygon is still there, but I have an extra one. This extra one I can now use, for example, as water, something for water. Turn this into one smoothing group. Now I just, like I said, I'm going to make it very crappy. It's a concrete block, and there is some nice water in there, something like this, and it's more transparent, and it has some specularity to it. Maybe it has some bump for the waves. We do that real quickly with noise modifier. Looks like water. Maybe smaller size. Yeah, looks pretty good. For now, if I render it, it's not even that much visible. What the hell? Make it visible over here like that, and maybe make the bump larger, 80. Oh, for some weird reason, he doesn't really like to show the. Yeah, there it is. I already see that this bump is even too big for this thing, so maybe give it a bump of 2. Wow, beautiful water. But like I said, I want to create like a fountain out of it. So what I want to do is I go to my particle systems, and in this case I'm going to use super spray. The normal spray is very simple, so I'm going to use a super spray like this over here. And the super spray, what this thing does, it just shoots out particles up in the sky. First of all, I want to make sure that I see all my particles, that I see 100%. So now it becomes more like a, I don't know, it will be some sort of water show where you have like all those lines coming up. In this case, the super spray can do a little bit of spread. So I can say my particles should spread out a little bit more like that. But still, it doesn't really feel like a fountain. One thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that my particles keep on emitting. So I'm going to make my animation longer. Let's do it 300 frames. And I say my emitter starts already at -10, so it already starts beforehand, and it stops at 300. So basically this thing is already constantly shooting out particles. Display until, sorry, also 300, start at -50. So basically now I have a continuous stream of particles shooting up. But for a fountain, we want water to shoot up, but also to fall down. So in this case, I need to add gravity. So I go to my forces over here, and I say I want to create gravity. Doesn't matter where it's located, so for now I can just place it closely over here.
But for example, if you make 2 gravities,
there is no point. Yeah, I mean you can make as many as you want, but it's about how many do you bind to your space, to your.
if you bind them all.
If you bind them all, I think it will just go faster, or they have the same effect. Basically, there is no reason for multiple gravities. But yeah, we can try it out in a minute.
But basically, if you have one deformer and you already bind them, you don't have to, because you cannot take the hand, you have multiple deformers there,
Yeah.
and then you select the particle and then you bind them with that. That's not, you have to first
bind
bind
them.
them with one,
Yeah,
and then you bind the couple
Yeah.
with the other one, so
Yeah.
that deformity completes the
yeah,
the
yeah,
whole,
yeah.
right?
So in this case now, what I can do is I take this particle system, and I bind it now to gravity, and then we'll see what happens. Boom. Ah, they're falling down, but they're also not really shooting up. So gravity is very high. Well, basically gravity is not high. Most of the time gravity already quite has some decent settings. But I need to go in my super spray and I need to tell to those particles, like guys, you have to be a little bit more powerful. You don't like shoot out water like that. No, you really want like a hose. Like yeah. It's not like somebody is like pushing out a little bit of water. So we can control that now over here with speed. I can say, now it really becomes like a big, somebody pushed a fire truck in there. Like, okay, now this is a little bit too much power. I want my particles to also to fall down. So now with speed I can control it. I say, roughly up to this. And now I have a particle system which basically shoots up. And at a certain point it reaches its highest point and then particles start to fall down again based on gravity. And now, because this is a super spray, I can say, hey, I want things to be visible. And I said, like, okay, what kind of particles do we want to see? I can do that facing particles that are always looking at you. We have the grow for and fade for. Yeah, can work. Real quickly play a little bit with particle size. Maybe something like that. This looks a bit weird. How does it look like if we're doing cubes? This could already be a low poly style fountain, basically. And now there are a couple of things that are in there. For example, one of the things is that grow for and fade for in the start. I can say, oh, my particles are growing very large or not. And also, like when they stop, I can say, oh, yeah, when you guys falling down, you become smaller. I can also leave grow for and fade for off. So particles will always stay the same size. I think it's nice in this case that they start very big, but when they fall down, they gradually become smaller. They become like tinier drops. Now this is maybe not a very interesting thing with the cubes, so maybe I have to go in and find a proper material for my water. So I would say that water, if I go in and if I would make this a square like this, I don't want to see the whole shape like that. So I want to go in and I want to do something with opacity. For now, for opacity, I would actually use something like a gradient, preferably a gradient ramp. You see that gradient ramp, because it's opacity, it says like, one part I make it transparent, that side, and I gradually become opaque. It's like, yeah, cool, but I don't want it from the side, but in this case I actually want to make a radial. And now I see that the radial thing, here, if I push in the background, it says like, yeah, nice, the radial, but I actually want to be flipped. I don't want the inside to be transparent, but I actually want the borders, the outside, to be transparent. So what I do is I just flip my colors around over here. It works from outside to inside. So if I take this gradient color, it's like, okay, you are white, so like that, and I say you are black. And now what happens is that now I don't see that shape anymore of that square, but I just see this white round puff, this round shape. I can still play over here with if it should be more or less transparent like this, or more over here, more like that. I can even push in multiple layers of transparency if I want. Oh shit, let's do that. Right click and delete over here. I can even play with the borders. I don't know if it's very visible, but basically those edges over here are still too nicely round. So what I want to do is I want to bring in some noise over here so that the edges get a little bit more squeaky. No, this is maybe a little bit too much. So I can play with the size over here. It's like, yeah, no, this is maybe a little bit too much of noise.
So you apply a material instead of a mesh or something like that. It's just
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. For now, I just apply a material to it. So I can say, okay, this is a shape that I like, not entirely. Maybe you want to play with a little bit of color. So like my water is a little bit more bluish color, kind of color. And now when I take this material, I can drag it on top of my super spray, but because those are cubes, it will look weird because of the transparency and the cube things. So in this case, cube is probably not going to help me that much. So I go in, and instead of cubes, I rather say I want to use facing particles. And now when I do facing, it's still not very nice actually. Why is it not so nice? Do a quickly check. Get material from Icon. For some weird reason, over here it looks nicer than in my viewport. Sometimes you can just go in Photoshop, build one yourself over there. 265 by 265 would already be enough. Create, and I want this thing to have like a completely background. And then I probably want to create a new layer, change to white, and do something over here. Something like that. And I probably want to use a little bit of feather. So where is it? Modify feather of 10 pixels is nice. Push it in. So now I get this soft dot basically. And then something that I could do, I don't know if it's possible over here, transform warp. I could try to make this dot a little bit more into a shape of a drop. So something like that, so that it's not entirely round, but more in the shape of a water drop. Save this image, JPEG for now, control over here. Now for opacity, if I load in a bitmap, and I'm gonna go to the desktop, I load in my water drop. This is already a little bit better than what I expected. I go in, material visible, push it in over here, quickly check. Okay, there's something weird going on with the mapping. Fuse, also make a copy. No, it's not necessary. This is really weird. Wait, if I just create a normal plane. And I'm actually loading in this object.
There you go.
So, now my particles are probably a little bit too large. So if I go in and make them smaller, this already works better. But now, okay, at least I got the shape in there, but now I get this weird, how do you say it, rotation and tumble. So I say, okay, don't spin. Now they're all falling flat,
Nice.
like that. So only from the top view it will look nice. So I say user-defined access, and I want them to more up like this. So they're not entirely. See, now it already works slightly better. It's not a very beautiful material.